But basically this happened in the summer of 1938. A 4-year-old boy named Alfred was on a fishing trip with his family. It was just him and his parents. They were honestly a normal, happy family, nothing out of the ordinary. They decided to go to Colorado's Rocky Mountain National Park. Now, things took a turn fairly early on for Alfred and his parents. They were all taking a hike along a river and little Alfred suddenly disappeared without any explanation. It says one moment he had been there walking in a line behind them, and the next the parents had turned around to find he was gone without a trace. And this is all very, very strange because they were the only ones around. They were just walking happily, talking, enjoying their time. His parents looked away from him for 2 seconds and looked back and he was gone. And the bizarre thing is that he was only 4 years old. 4-year-olds can't get places very far. I mean, yes, they could be fast, trust me. But it's just weird that in 2 seconds he was out of his parents' line of vision altogether. It says there had been no shouting or any sign of distress. They began calling him. He didn't answer. He didn't come back. He had seemingly just ceased to exist. So there wasn't even a sound when he went missing. It was quiet, and I guess they stopped hearing his footsteps. They turned around. He was just gone. I can't even imagine how these parents felt in that moment. Imagine having your child behind you 1 second and the next second, like, he's just nowhere to be seen. And they are in a huge national park. I will show you guys pictures, but there's trees everywhere. It's a huge hiking trail. It's a very easy place to get lost, so I can't even imagine what was going through their heads at this point. So obviously they went and called the police right away, and everyone's first thought was that maybe this boy fell into the river, but the parents kept saying no, that couldn't have happened. We weren't even close to the river. Because yeah, it was a river hiking trail, but there was like a long stretch in between the actual hiking trail and the river. So the boy would have had to walk pretty far to get even close to the river. But nevertheless, they immediately went about blocking off the river so it could be thoroughly searched, which makes sense. I mean, the authorities want to check every possible area this boy might be, whether that's in the water or off in the forest somewhere. So this river was 6 miles long, and you have to imagine if a boy falls into it, the river is running rapidly, so he could go way, way far down the river, all the way down the park. So they searched this entire 6-mile stretch of river for this boy. It took them 5 days and they couldn't find any sign of him. So then they decided to bring in the bloodhounds, and if you guys aren't familiar, they usually bring in these dogs to trace someone's scent. They're usually really, really great. They have solved so many mysteries and crimes using these dogs. So they gave the dogs this little boy's scent. And this is what is so, so weird. So the dogs took this scent and they started taking off towards where the boy was supposed to be. They tracked his scent to around 500 feet uphill from where his parents had been when he had disappeared, which was odd considering he had supposedly gone missing as he was walking behind them. So you have to imagine that 500 feet uphill is huge. A little 4-year-old boy could not climb 500 feet uphill. And it's like a rocky terrain. It's not an area that even like an adult could really go up. So the fact that these bloodhounds traced his scent so far up from where they were hiking, it was just very bizarre. And what was also strange was that these bloodhounds were following this little boy's trail and suddenly just stopped in the middle of looking for him and lied down on the ground, which is apparently very, very odd behavior for bloodhounds. Usually they'll like continue tracking someone until they find them, and the trail just goes on and on and on. But they literally followed his trail for a little while and just abruptly stopped and lied down as if there was nowhere else for them to go. Because usually when they stop, they found the person or they found a clue or a piece of their clothing. But Alfred wasn't there, there was nothing on the trail, they just stopped. It says the bloodhound's trail just abruptly stopped, as if it vanished, just like the boy had. So it's almost like the boy was walking and vanished into thin air. And this next part, when I read it, creeped me out so much. It says the very day after Alfred vanished, there was an odd report that came in from some hikers in the area. The hikers, who were a couple, had been on Old Fall River Road, about 6 miles away from where Alfred had been, with very rugged terrain and about 3,000 feet higher from where Alfred had been. And what's really creepy is that at this point, these hikers had no idea a boy was missing. They hadn't heard about Alfred yet. They were just on a hike together, minding their own business. But they reported seeing a rather worrying sight. They claimed that they had seen a young boy perched up on a high ridge in an area ominously called the Devil's Nest. And this was near the top of Mount Chaplin. Now, I don't know if you guys have heard of this, but the Devil's Nest, I believe, is a common term to describe an area where people often go missing. But imagine just going on a hike with your boyfriend or your husband or whoever you're with, and you're walking, it's a normal day, you're talking, you're on a nice hike. I love hiking, so I do this all the time. And you look in front of you, and on a high ridge, there's a little boy just like perched, staring at you. Ugh, I'm just getting chills. It's so freaky. So this is what they sent into the police. It says, the hikers reported that the boy had been forlornly sitting up there and then suddenly moved out of sight, which the hikers said looked as if he was being jerked backwards out of sight. So this boy is just like sadly and ominously sitting up on this perch, crouched over, staring at them. And it's like the moment the hikers see him, something pulls him back out of view. Like the term jerked back is just so creepy because it just, if I'm imagining this, it's like it just happened so fast. It says, at the time they could not figure out how such a young boy would be out there in the remote wilderness by himself, or how he could possibly have climbed up onto that really high ridge. Because when police were investigating that, it's literally like impossible for any human, no matter what age, to get up there without any aid, without any equipment. So it's just bizarre that this boy was up here. I keep saying bizarre, but this whole story is just so strange to me. According to the hikers, as soon as they had gotten home and seen the news, they had realized that the boy they had seen was the missing Alfred Beilhartz. So the boy's face that they saw up on this ridge was the one they saw on the television. They put two and two together. Can you even imagine what was going through their heads? So authorities acted on this tip, obviously, because if you hear that someone saw the missing boy, you're gonna want to go to the exact place that they saw him. So they took a journey back out to this ridge, and it says it was a perilous hike through thick, unforgiving forested terrain littered with rough brush and dense trees. So it's just not an easy hike to get there. But when they got to the top of the looming ridge, they could find no trace of the boy. And as I was saying, it says here as well, considering the difficulty of the terrain, the elevation, and the steep, treacherous climb, park rangers came to the conclusion that it would have been impossible for the boy to have made the hike out there, especially in the time frame, in one day. It was 6 miles out from where he had been and 3,000 feet high. 4 years old. He was 4 years old. He could not have possibly climbed the ridge alone without specialized climbing equipment and experience. So police were baffled. Everyone who heard this story was baffled. This was in the newspapers, on the news, and it says there are several weird details about this case. And here are the most common questions that people have asked about this case that still haven't been answered. It says, how did Alfred manage to just vanish right under his parents' noses without making a sound? What happened to his scent trail? Why did it suddenly stop? And why did the bloodhounds following him act so oddly? How could Alfred hike all the way up to Mount Chaplin, trudging 6 miles and 3,000 feet through unforgiving, perilous terrain in such a short time? What did the hikers mean that he was jerked back? We may never know, and Alfred Beilhartz has never been found. So I was reading a lot of articles about this online the other day, and a lot of these sites started taking it to a more supernatural element. There were things mentioned like Slender Man and really creepy creatures of the forest. I think like Bigfoot was even mentioned. I mean, people really went out on a limb, and in my opinion, as freaky and creepy as this story is to me, I wouldn't jump right to supernatural just because I do find it a bit disrespectful to take such an alarming case of a real life human boy and turn it into something paranormal. But I mean, you guys know I believe in the paranormal. I think anything really could happen. The fact that this has never been solved, and this was from 1938, I think I said, it's just sad and bizarre, and I'd love to know what you guys think down below. Give me your opinions. If you know any more about this case, definitely comment that down below as well. We're gonna start off with a very disturbing and what people say is a very paranormal case, which is one of John Doe. It says, perhaps the most baffling of all the strange disappearances in national parks is the disappearance of a young boy known as John Doe. Now what's frustrating is it doesn't say which year this occurred. I really wish it did, but regardless, we're gonna get into this story. 3-year-old John Doe was last seen near a fly fishing river. Oh my gosh, he was so young. And then he promptly vanished vanished for 5 hours. So this is actually a case that was solved, and I think this is the only one I'm going to discuss today that was solved, unfortunately. So he was missing for 5 hours, so people were frantically looking for him during this time period. A search party found him, dazed but unharmed, and in the middle of a grove of trees. John Doe had a really strange story to tell, so I'm going to explain this to you guys, and you have to imagine being the police officers interviewing him and listening to the strange story he has to tell. I feel like if I was one of the people in the room, I would probably just be flabbergasted and terrified at the same time. When investigators asked the boy what happened while he vanished, he said that he followed a woman who looked like his grandmother to a mountain. Ugh, I just got total chills. That's so gross. He then found himself in a room that had a bunch of motionless robots and weapons lying all over a dusty floor. What? The boy then claimed that he noticed a strange glow coming from the strange old woman's head. And then, the most puzzling of all, she asked him to go to the washroom on a piece of paper that she had. And the boy claimed that when he refused to do so, the old woman got very agitated and aggressive. The woman said that the boy was from outer space and that he was planted in his mother's womb. She then told him to go and wait in the trees until he was found. No one has any idea where the boy was when he disappeared. It'd be easy to say that the disappearance of John Doe was just a child's overactive imagination. However, there is something very bizarre about this disappearance case that gives John Doe such an insane story. So I was reading a lot of comments on this story and so many people kept saying aliens. And honestly guys, I really do believe in aliens. I do believe there's just life beyond Earth. I mean, space in the universe is humongous, so how can there not be, you know what I mean? So this is just really eerie to me. So I want to know down below, do you think this was just a child's imagination? Maybe he just got lost and just like came up with this story. I mean, he was only 3 years old, and I know that people that young do have a very overactive imagination. Or do you think that what he says was actually true and that he was being led somewhere either by something really paranormal or by aliens? So let me know down below what you think, but that's really creepy. Like the whole time I read that story, I had like chills and I felt gross. Like someone who looked like his grandmother led him away. Ugh. So this is about 8-year-old Catherine Van Elst. She disappeared from Devil's Den State Park, where she and her family were camping. Catherine apparently was playing with her brothers when she wandered off and got lost. And what makes her disappearance remarkable is that she was found 6 days later wandering in the woods, eerily calm. So she was just like walking just normally, looking totally calm, looking totally unbothered. And this next part really freaks me out. Basically, when they found her, she was in a cave in the middle of the forest, and as they walked up to the cave, she walked out and said, "Here I am." I'm just like imagining this being played out, like her like creepily walking out of the cave like, "Here I am." Like, oh, and looking calm and not scared and not crying. Like honestly, if I was a kid and got lost in the woods, I would cry until I was found, you know what I mean? And it's also really eerie because it said that so many other hikers have gotten lost in that exact area. So when I was reading more into it, it did say that people just thought she was abducted, which actually could have happened, and maybe her abductor let her just go when they realized so many investigators were trying to find her. I don't really know. I feel like that definitely could have happened. What do you guys think? Comment down below. Alright, so this next case is the last one we're going to talk about, and this one unfortunately was unsolved, and he also wasn't found. So this one is about Dennis Martin, and this one happened in 1969. And it says he disappeared in North Carolina's Great Smoky Mountains National Park. See, it's always national parks. I feel like now when I go to a national park, I'm gonna be so freaked out. Okay, it says Dennis Martin was on a camping trip near the Tennessee-North Carolina state line with his family. It was in the summer of 1969. It was an annual Father's Day tradition. All of the men in the Martin family headed to Smoky Mountain National Park to camp and hike. Dennis and his brothers had planned a prank on the adults. They were each going to jump out on different sides of the campsite to scare them. It's a pretty typical prank that should have ended with some startled shouts and a lot of laughter. But the laughter ended quickly when they realized that Dennis was missing. So basically every other kid had jumped out except for Dennis, which was so bizarre because they all hid basically around the adults. They didn't go very far. So when only a few of the kids jumped out, it was like, okay, well, where's Dennis? He was just hiding. It says family, park rangers, and other hikers spread out to search for Dennis almost immediately, but he was nowhere to be found. That evening, there was very heavy rainfall, which is bad news when you're trying to track a missing boy. The search for Martin became the largest in National Park Service history. One of the people searching was Park Ranger Dwight McCarter, who had successfully tracked down hundreds of missing people, including young children, so he was baffled when he wasn't able to find Dennis, because every other one of his searches had been successful. They could not find even one trace of his tracks. Dennis seemed to have disappeared completely, leaving no trace at all. His disappearance is still a mystery, and this next part is really freaky. There was another family who was camping very near the Martin family when this happened, and what's really freaky is that this family, their name was the Key family, and it says they allegedly heard a little boy scream and then saw a bear-like man with something slung over his shoulder that looks like he could be carrying a small child. But we'll never know whether this was related to the Martins' disappearance. So that is so eerie. The fact that there was a family camped so close by and they saw this like really hairy man-like bear creature with a child slung over its shoulder, and the child was screaming. And then when I'm reading these comments, people who have camped in the same area have seen this bear-like person there as well. So in today's video, we are going to talk about the unsolved disappearances of the Bennington Triangle. Now, I had no idea what this was until last week when I was researching, but it's a chunk of land in Vermont that for some reason so many people have gone missing in. Like literally disappeared in thin air. Like it's not like just one or two people went missing there. Hundreds of people have just literally vanished in this small space of land. So today we're going to talk about some of those cases, and it freaks me out so much. The fact that you can just be like on a hike or on a walk and suddenly you just like cease to exist. At first people thought like, oh, maybe it's a serial killer. But after like 50 years had gone by and it was still happening, people were like, no, this can't just be one guy. He would be super old by now. How are these still happening? So a ton of people are now just saying that it's gotta be something paranormal. It says that the Bennington Triangle is a loosely defined area that encompasses the ghost town of Glastonbury, which was once a small logging community centered on the eponymous mountain in southwestern Vermont. It has been abandoned since the 19th century. So now the Glastonbury area is pretty much untouched. It's not a populated area. It's basically remote wilderness. So when you're going there, you're basically going there to hike. So these missing persons cases started 70 years ago. And since then, that area has sort of been a very eerie one, and not a lot of people go there anymore since hearing about what's been happening. And not only are there unsolved disappearances, there also have been a lot of weird sightings, like figures in the woods, monsters, even aliens have been mentioned. So the Bennington Triangle is just not somewhere that you want to be. Okay, so the first person who ever went missing there was in 1945. It was the vanishing of Middie Rivers. He was a 74-year-old local hunting guide. He led a party of 4 hunters around the area called Hell Hollow in the southwest woods of Glastonbury before he was suddenly lost. And people were really confused by this because he had been hiking and hunting there for so many years. Like he was 74 years old, so he was probably doing this for like 40 years. So he knew the forest, he knew how to get around. So when he was suddenly lost, people were like, wait, that's impossible. So the first day he went missing, tons of people searched for him and it was completely unsuccessful. But people were still sort of positive because they were like, hey, if he's missing, he's very knowledgeable about the forest, maybe he'll return to town soon. So people waited a couple days hoping that he would find his way back, but this was unfortunately not the case. Soon there were more than 300 concerned locals, and tons of people started searching through the vast wilderness for 8 days straight, through the daytime, through the nighttime, and they couldn't find a single shred of evidence. They covered the entire area. They couldn't find any pieces of clothing, anything he would have been carrying, no signs of him whatsoever. And then the next year, there was another case of someone going missing. And this is arguably the most famous missing persons cases in the whole area of Vermont. It was the disappearance of Paula Welden. Welden was an 18-year-old college student at Bennington College. She decided to hike a leg of the long long trail during her Thanksgiving break when most of her friends had returned home for the holiday. So instead of going home to her family, I guess she decided to go on a hike before. She was last seen on Sunday, December 1st, 1946. She was wearing easy to spot red and was entering the long trail near Glastonbury Mountain, but she never showed up for her Monday classes. So 1,000 people went to search for her. That was even bigger than the year prior when that man went missing. They even had a reward for finding her. If anybody brought her back, they would get $5,000. So just take this in. There were thousands of people looking for her. They actually had aircrafts going over the entire area that she was. So looking over the trees, looking over the trails, and once again, there were no clues as to where she was. It was like she also just vanished out of thin air. It's just so scary how these cases still remain open to this day. So 3 years after the disappearance of Paula Welden, someone else went missing. And this one people say is a much more supernatural case. The other two definitely still were, but this one was definitely more so. So there was a 68-year-old man named James E. Tedford, and he boarded a bus to Bennington after visiting relatives in St. Albans, Vermont. There were numerous eyewitnesses, including the driver, that later confirmed that Tedford had been in his seat as late as the last stop before Bennington. So he was the only one in the bus. The driver saw him, people saw him get on the bus, but when the bus finally pulled into Bennington, Tedford was nowhere to be found. It was creepy because right before they hit the border of Bennington, the bus driver was just driving along, looking behind him, seeing Tedford sitting on a seat. He was looking at him through his mirror on the bus, and the moment they got into Bennington, literally Tedford just disappeared right from the bus. He vanished into thin air while inside a moving vehicle. Tedford's luggage was literally still in the seat where he was sitting. If the witnesses are correct, Tedford would have disappeared from his seat as the bus was traveling down Route 7 through the Bennington Triangle. Doesn't that creep you out so much? When I read that, I was like, no way. Like, I do not want to ever go there. Like, as much as I am intrigued by this area, I just don't want to go there. So nearly a year later, in October of 1950, an 8-year-old boy named Paul Jepson went missing as well. He was last seen happily playing in the family pickup truck by his mother, who left to tend to pigs at the dump where she and her husband were caretakers. Then he just vanished without a trace. Once again, they got all these people to be a search party to find him, and this time police even got bloodhounds involved. And I've talked about bloodhounds with you guys before. These guys can smell amazingly. Like, they found a ton, thousands of missing people all over the world with these bloodhounds. Probably millions even. Once again, no one could find him. And what's creepy is that as these missing persons cases go on, they seem to get more frequent, like they're more common, the space between them. For example, only 2 weeks after this boy went missing, someone else went missing. 53-year-old Frida Langer, who was an experienced hiker once again. She was there all of the time hiking. After hiking a brief half mile with her cousin Herbert, she accidentally fell into a stream. So she told her cousin Herbert and her husband, who was there with her as well, that she was just gonna go walk back to camp to change her clothes. And literally, her cousin and her husband never saw her again after that. Helicopters were going over the forest, 400 people were looking for her, and this is the only case where they actually found a body. Every other case, they have not found anything. It was found near the Somerset Reservoir, and the cause of death could not be determined, which is really weird because usually when you find a body, you can easily tell what happened. Were they in a fight? Was it an animal? Was it natural causes? But people literally had no idea what happened to her. So mysterious disappearances aren't new. For whatever reason, some people just seem to vanish without a trace, never to be seen again. But there is also a more stranger type of disappearance, and that is the type where people vanish in full view of others. So where there's witnesses watching someone literally disappear. These are the cases in which people were there one moment and gone the next, seeming to have just literally faded from existence, leaving us just baffled and questioning what what the heck just happened. So we're gonna take a look at the history of some of the more serious cases, and the first one happened sometime in the 1760s. It was in the English town of Shepton Mallet. There lived an elderly man in his 70s by the name of Owen Parfitt. He was a very, very sick man and was unable to walk around or really do anything on his own. He pretty much spent his days completely bedridden. It was really unfortunate. So the only help he really got was from his sister. So he would either lie in bed all day or she would help him go out and sit on the porch so he can actually experience being outside, seeing the sun. But all he could do was just sit there because he literally couldn't move. And according to the story, one day Owen was sitting in his usual spot by the door where his sister had been keeping an eye on him as usual. But on this day, the weather was really, really chilly, so Owen had covered himself completely with a coat. So his sister was inside the house preparing a meal and she realized it was getting a little bit cold outside, so she thought that she would go back outside and bring him in. But the moment she stepped out onto the porch, all that was left on his seat was a coat. And this was just really bizarre to her because he couldn't move a muscle on his own, and she had just been out there watching him moments ago. He was just lying there with the coat over top of him doing nothing. She walked in for I think 2 minutes and came back out, and all that was left was a coat. Since he was unable to walk on his own, she at first thought that perhaps a neighbor had moved him inside, but after looking around and asking everybody, the old man was nowhere to be found, and the neighbors denied having moved him. And even they had seen him sitting there all day. So it was such a mystery and was so bizarre. Owen's sister searched the area, but Owen was nowhere to be found. And it was also baffling that he could have gotten so far so soon in front of so many people with the inability to walk. Because they searched miles and miles around the property, he would not have been able to get anywhere. So his disappearance remains a mystery to this day. The next very serious case was in the 1800s. It was on the night of November 25th, 1809. A man named Benjamin Bathurst was on his way to Berlin. On the way there, Bathurst made a stop at the town of Perleberg. He wanted to get some new horses, and he also wanted to have a hot meal. When the horses were ready and he had finished his meal, he excused himself and told his assistant he would go out and wait in the carriage. But when the assistant went out to the carriage a few moments after, the door of the carriage was open, but Bathurst was nowhere to be seen. And there was also no sign of where he could have gone because he was there just a few seconds before. So a massive search was immediately put together, complete with dogs scouring the woods, house-to-house searches, and thorough searching of the nearby river, but nothing could be found. So he was just never seen again. So it's so interesting how these people were seen like 2 seconds, and it's like once you turn your head and look back again, the person's just gone. But sometimes not only did the person disappear, but they disappeared right in front of someone else's eyes, literally fading away in plain sight, and that's what this next case is about. It was in 1815 at a Prussian prison. There was a prisoner by the name of Jessii, and he was doing a 10-year sentence there. So one day he was being led through the exercise yard. He was covered in chains in the line of a bunch of other prisoners. So they were being watched very carefully by all of the guards there. All of the prisoners were in one area in a line walking, but then something very strange happened. According to the other prisoners and the guards, Jessii began to literally fade away. His body gradually became transparent until finally his empty chains clattered to the ground. And this was in front of everybody looking at him. They were all completely baffled. They were stunned in place. According to the case, 30 people watched him disappear. So it wasn't like one crazy prisoner who was like on drugs or something who was like, hey, I saw him disappear. No, 30 people, including the guards, saw this. So people just started to claim that it was an act of God, and they kind of just left it at that. There was another case that happened in 1873. It was in Leamington Spa, England. There was a shoemaker by the name of James Warson. He was just out with his friends having a good time when he decided to make a bet with them. He told them that he could run without stopping all the way to Coventry, which was a full 16 miles away. His friends did not believe he could do this. They were all like, there's no way you can run all that way. But they decided to take him up on his bet, so they let him run 16 miles, and all of the friends got into a horse-drawn carriage to go behind him. Warson ran for a few miles without any problems, and his friends were starting to think that they might actually lose the bet. But then he tripped on something on the road. The story goes that Warson fell forward but never hit the ground. Instead, he completely vanished out of existence right before his friends' eyes. A police search turned up nothing, and this seems to be another case of someone who just spontaneously ceased to exist in full view of eyewitnesses. Imagine being those friends in that moment. You have your friend just like running in front of you, suddenly he goes to trip, and then as he's falling, he just disappears. Now we're gonna talk about one of a more recent case. When I say recent, I mean 1959, but it's a lot more recent than the 1700s. In April of 1959, a man named Bruce Campbell was driving by car with his wife to go visit their son who lived really far away. At one point on their long journey, they decided to take a break and go and sleep at a hotel. It was a motel in Jacksonville, Illinois. The couple was exhausted from driving all day, so they promptly retired for the night. But when Mrs. Campbell woke up in the morning and looked beside her, her husband had completely vanished from the bed. At first, she wasn't very concerned because she thought, oh, maybe he just got up early in the morning and went somewhere to get coffee or whatever. But what was really strange was that her husband's clothes were just lying in the spot where he was sleeping, and he had gone. His suitcases were still in the room. Everything just seemed very eerie. Additionally, all of his personal belongings and even his wallet with all of his money were still precisely where he had left them. So if he had gone out to get breakfast or coffee, you'd think he would have brought his wallet or something. Even after an investigation by authorities, Bruce Campbell was never found. Ugh, that's just so creepy to me. I'm just imagining like going to a hotel with Ty and waking up and he's not there, but his clothes are there and all of his stuff's there. Like, that's just like, that's my worst fear. There's another very similar case involving a couple that happened in 1975. It was when Jackson and Martha Wright were driving from New Jersey to New York City. The two were driving through the Lincoln Tunnel when they noticed that there was a large amount of condensation on their windows. And so much was piling up on their windows that they could barely see it all when they were driving. So Jackson decided to pull over to the side of the road so they could begin wiping off all of the fog on their windows. It was at this point that Jackson says he turned to see how his wife was doing and found that she was completely gone. In fact, the woman was nowhere to be seen, even though she had been there just moments before. And Jackson was saying that he didn't hear or see anything unusual. There was actually no cars around, no one was around. He didn't hear her scream or jump. She was literally there. He turned and looked back and she was gone. It would have been impossible for her to get very far in such a brief amount of time. And yes, this does sound very suspicious on Jackson's part when he went to the police to talk about this, but the police investigated this for such a long time and found nothing. So Martha Wright's disappearance still remains a mystery to this day, just like all of these other cases. And the last case we're going to talk about today is actually one from 2007. So this is the most recent missing person case I think I've ever done in this series. I try and really keep it before the 2000s just because I want to stay respectful to families and I don't want to ever talk about something too new that could still be in the works. So I like more like historical cases, but today, because it relates to this video, we're going to talk about one that happened in 2007. So this happened on July 8th, 2007, and it's about someone who seemed to have just stepped off the face of the earth. 55-year-old Barbara Bollock was out on a hiking trip with her friend Jim Ramaker. They were in Montana's Bitterroot Mountains. They weren't walking right beside each other, but she was only about 6 feet behind him. At one point along their scenic hike, Jim claimed that he stopped to admire the scenery, and when he turned to look behind him after a mere minute, Barbara was nowhere to be seen. And it's so weird because you can hear her footsteps walking behind him just as normal, so while he was looking at the scenery, he could still hear her behind him, but all of a sudden after a mere few seconds, he stopped hearing her walk, and he looked around and she was gone. No screaming, no sign of her running away, literally just not there anymore. So as usual, the police did a complete search of the area, and they also found no reason to suspect that Jim had done anything to her, and no leads on this case have ever been found. They also didn't find any evidence that she had been there, like her shoes, clothing, nothing was around. They couldn't find anything. I just find all of these cases to be so strange and bizarre. Alright, let's get started on the very first case. Bonita Bickwit disappeared with her boyfriend Mitchell Weiser on July 27, 1973. The pair was hiking up to a concert festival in New York. The last person to see the couple was a truck driver who gave them a ride to the concert. However, it is unclear whether the couple actually reached the concert or not. Originally, police just thought that Bonita and Mitchell had run off together. The pair was very much in love and had even exchanged wedding rings earlier in the summer. Because this is a very common thing. If couples are young and in love, a lot of the time they do run off together. They don't necessarily disappear completely, but they do run off. So the police originally thought that, yeah, this was probably the case. But after talking to their friends and family, people who knew them said that they were acting very, very strange before they left. There have been a few unconfirmed sightings of the couple, but no trace or evidence has actually been found. And there have been a lot of speculation that while the couple was hiking to the concert, maybe because it was so hot that day, they went to the river and accidentally drowned. No one really knows what happened, but the couple was so in love, so it's just bizarre how they just like vanished. Okay, let's move on to the next case. On March 5th, 1957, William Patterson and his wife Margaret vanished from their home in El Paso, Texas. The couple wasn't reported missing until 5 months after they vanished because their neighbor thought the couple had been on an extended vacation. That is so crazy to me. Imagine going missing and no one knows or reports it for 5 months. I mean, I know my family and friends would report me in like a day because like they wouldn't have heard from me, but it's just so bizarre how this couple could go missing for that long and not even be like suspected of being missing. When the case was finally opened, police investigators found that the couple had left their car and their cat behind, and that their house was oddly in complete disarray. It's very strange how their neighbors thought this couple was on vacation when clearly their car was still parked in the driveway. That doesn't make any sense to me. The neighbors said that on the night of their supposed disappearance, the couple seemed very upset. A short while later, a letter was received from William that provided instructions as to who his properties were going to be distributed to. Investigators suspected that it was not William who wrote this letter, but one of his employees. That is just so bizarre. And they were never found, so this case was never solved, and it'll always just be super mysterious and no one knows what happened to them. This next one is really weird, especially because it's about two parents. Claude and Martha Sue Shelton disappeared from Gary's trailer park after they tucked their 3 children into bed to go to sleep. After the Sheltons kissed their children goodnight, they drove away in their 1967 Ford Galaxy and were never heard from again. Evidence of where the couple could have gone is scarce. Their car has never been recovered, and nobody remembers seeing them the night of their disappearance. And what's really strange, first of all, the couple has 3 children to look after, but family and friends of this couple said that they loved their children dearly and would never leave them alone. So these 3 children are now being raised by their grandmother, and they'll never know what happened to their parents. It's so bizarre. If my parents just like got up and left, I would just not believe they did it on purpose because like they love me. So it's just weird. Let's move on to this next case, which is like my worst fear, and that is the ocean. Ugh. Thomas and Eileen Cassidy were a married couple who were stranded at sea while they were scuba diving with a group at St. Crispin's Reef. It wasn't discovered that the couple was missing until 2 days after the boat that transported the group to go scuba diving left them behind. When it was finally discovered that the couple was missing, an air and sea search took place, but there was no sign of the couple. So there are a bunch of theories about what happened to them, but people think that they just drowned and were eaten by sharks, which is horrible. But that makes me so nervous to go on any like scuba diving boat or like group, because how did the people like doing this scuba diving day not notice they weren't on the boat when they went back? Like they could have just been out scuba diving, like having a great time together, and the boat just left them out in the middle of the ocean with these sharks. Oh, I hate that. I'm getting like chills. Ugh. Let's move on to the next case. Camden Sylvia and her boyfriend Michael Sullivan were last seen jogging on November 7th, 1997. After they had failed to return home, Sylvia's mother went into their apartment to investigate. She found that everything was in its place. The only things that were missing were 2 pairs of running shoes, a set of house keys, and Sylvia's bag. And there's absolutely no evidence about what happened to them. There are theories, but nothing has been confirmed. Like just imagine being that mother, like your daughter is just on a jog and she never comes back. And I feel like that happens a lot. Like a ton of people get abducted while out like running or jogging, like depending on where you're running. Ugh, be careful. All right, the next case. In April of 1980, Charles Romer and his wife Catherine were on a trip back to their home in Scarsdale, New York from their winter house in Miami, Florida. The wealthy couple checked into the Holiday Inn located in Brunswick, Georgia, after which they unloaded their luggage and headed back out in their vehicle. But that would be the last time anyone would ever see them. A highway patrolman would later report that he had seen the missing vehicle south of Brunswick parked near a group of restaurants, but this was not verified. The police also looked inside of their car. Nothing was amiss. There was no evidence of foul play. Everything seemed totally normal. So it's just weird because they checked into a hotel, put their stuff in the rooms, and then maybe went out to dinner, but their car was left there and they were nowhere to be seen. So remember last time I was talking about how I'd really like to talk about a case where someone went missing for a long period of time and then came back with a strange story. Something maybe paranormal even. So I finally found a case like that, and trust me, there are a million cases like that, so there are so many we can talk about. But today we're specifically talking about one of those cases where a man went missing for 15 months. People thought he was never gonna come back, and then one day he just showed up and he had a crazy story to tell. And this happened in an area called the Lake Michigan Triangle, and there have been so many strange events that have happened within this triangle, and it's so weird because I feel like there are a ton of places around the world called the blank triangle, and there's always so many paranormal events that go on within these triangles, so I want to cover them all eventually. Today we're going to be talking about the mysterious disappearance of Stephen Kubacki and his odd reappearance 15 months later. I'm still just so blown away by this. Imagine one of your family members being gone for so long that you literally have no more hope and they show up again, and it happens very often, but I just can't imagine being in his shoes or in his family's shoes. That's just so crazy to me. One of the strangest missing person cases ever recorded in the USA is that of Stephen Kubacki. Stephen Kubacki went missing for 15 months without a trace. It is then claimed he woke up in a field wearing strange clothes with no memory of the previous 15 months. Okay, can I just say this is my worst fear ever? Imagine 15 months going by and you have no recollection of it at all, and you just wake up with someone else's clothes on. Oh my gosh, that is just a nightmare that nobody would ever want to experience. In February 1978, Stephen, a student at the time learning German, went missing in the Michigan area. It was an area known as the Lake Michigan Triangle. Now, most of the cases that I have talked about have been so far from where I live now, but Michigan is not that far from my house. Like, yeah, it's quite a drive, but I can get there within a day. So it always freaks me out the closer that these like paranormal triangles are to me. I wonder if there are any in Canada. That would be crazy. The Lake Michigan Triangle, sometimes referred to as the Michigan Triangle, spans from Manitowoc, Wisconsin to Ludington, Michigan, and south to Benton Harbor. The triangle has accounted for numerous mysterious events beginning in 1891. So this has been happening for a very long time. 1891 is a long time ago. So the first thing that ever happened in this triangle was when a man named Thomas Hume set off across Lake Michigan for lumber. What he didn't know is that he wouldn't be returning. He disappeared along with his crew of 7 sailors. Not even a trace of the boat was ever found. And that also freaks me out because there have been a lot of instances where sailors go out in the middle of this lake and their boats are never found, and neither are they. It's like they just disappear in the middle of this lake. But let's talk about what happened to Stephen. Before he went missing, Stephen said he was going to go skiing. He was reported missing by his worried family a day after he was due to return from the trip. After he went missing, search teams scouted the area he was known to have headed to. They found his skis and his poles on the beach of Lake Michigan and footprints on the ice leading up to the lake. This must have really confused people, because imagine looking for someone who went missing and you find the skis, but then you see his footprints heading out to the middle of a frozen lake. People don't usually just walk out onto ice, especially a lake that's not normally skated on. I don't even know if people ever skate on this lake. While searching for him, the rescue crew flew over the area, and it was reported that his footprints appeared to stop at the edge of the ice. The ice was unbroken, and a search of the area revealed no clue as to what had happened to Stephen. So his footprints were just walking across this lake, and suddenly suddenly stopped. And the ice wasn't broken, so he couldn't have fallen through. The footprints just stopped and he vanished. Later that day, they found his backpack in the same general area as his skis. No other evidence or sign of Stephen could be found. It appeared he had just vanished into thin air. Now, the return of Stephen really freaks me out, and there are not a lot of answers as to what exactly happened to him because, as I said, he has no recollection. All he knew was what he returned with, and a lot of the stuff that he had were not his. May 5th, 1979, 15 months later, Stephen walked up to his father's door, rang the doorbell, and was surprised to discover he had been missing for so long. Stephen said to his father that he didn't remember much. So he wakes up in an area that he's not familiar with and immediately goes to his parents' house, which honestly is something I would definitely do as well. And imagine you thinking you maybe fell asleep overnight and your parents were like, no, you were gone for over a year. Imagine how mind-blowing that would be. So this is all that he knew. Stephen had woken up in Pittsfield, 40 miles from his father's house, lying in a meadow wearing clothes that weren't his. He had a small satchel beside him with maps that weren't his. Where he woke up was 700 miles from Lake Michigan. This is absolutely insane. 700 miles from where he was last skiing. He had random maps that he had no idea whose they were, what they were for. He was wearing someone else's clothes and he could not remember. Reporters asked him repeatedly if he would talk to someone. He said he didn't need to because he didn't have any psychological problems and nothing to say about the time he was missing. It was driving reporters crazy because it was such an interesting story, and these reporters wanted to like make a whole news segment on it, but he had nothing to say. All he could say was, I literally don't know, guys. I don't know what happened to me. So they were trying to get answers out of him, but he literally couldn't answer them. After 1983, Stephen got a master's in linguistics and a PhD in clinical psychology. So there was nothing wrong with him mentally. He just lost 15 months of time, but he was a really intelligent man. Nothing was wrong mentally with him. And that's what really confused people because they couldn't understand how such a crazy event could happen to someone and him not have any psychological damage. But yeah, that's all the answers that I could gather about him and what happened to him. It drives me crazy not being able to know, and I'm sure it drives him even crazier not being able to know what happened to him. I don't know how you could live a normal life after that. There are a lot of speculation online and a ton of people are pointing to aliens, which I guess could make some sense. I mean, if he disappeared into thin air and was taken so far away and just basically dropped in the middle of a field, a lot of people think it was aliens. Let me know what you guys think. I literally cannot come up with something in my head that makes sense, but do you think it was something paranormal? Because obviously I'm always open to stuff like that. So there was also another huge disappearance that happened at the Michigan Triangle, and it was the disappearance of Northwest Flight 2501. Now, it's weird because I have actually never heard of this event until now, and it seems like a really huge event. When a plane goes missing, that's a really big deal. So I'm gonna quickly talk about that case. One of the most mysterious cases over Lake Michigan happened in 1950 when Northwest Airlines Flight 2501, which was carrying 58 people, crashed into Lake Michigan. And what's crazy is that the plane was never found. It crashed into the lake and was never found. A plane was never found in the water. You know how big planes are? So this is the last thing that anybody ever heard from the pilot. The pilot had just requested to descend to 2500 because of a severe electrical storm which was lashing the lake with high velocity winds, and that's when the plane disappeared from radar. To this day, the plane wreckage has not been found, and the cause of the crash remains unknown. About 2 hours after the last communication with Flight 2501, 2 police officers reported seeing a strange red light hovering over Lake Michigan, and this red light disappeared after 10 minutes, leading some to believe a UFO was to blame. So once again, people are blaming aliens for this disappearance. So the very first story we're going to talk about happened in 1976. It was called the Allagash alien abductions. In 1976, 4 friends in their early 20s went camping in rural Maine. Oh man, so they're basically my age in their early 20s. Wait, I'm in my mid-20s now. I'm 25. Oh my goodness. I can't even say early 20s anymore. I'm mid-20s. Anyway, sorry, just sudden realization there. On the second night, they noticed a very bright light, but nothing more. On the third night, they decided to try night fishing. In the canoe, they noticed the bright light again. That is why you don't go night fishing. I mean, who was out in the dark camping and they're like, hey, let's go on the lake, even though it's pitch black outside? That's just like your first mistake. One of the men used their flashlight to make an SOS pattern at the light. Then the light expanded and enveloped all 4 men. That's such a weird reaction to do. Like, imagine you're out in the middle of the lake and you see a bright light, so you take out your flashlight and you're like, hey, SOS, come and get me. Like, who would want to do that? So this light expanded and enveloped all of them, and apparently that's the last thing they remember. They woke up back at their campsite with no recollection of what ended up happening with the light or how they got off the water. The fire they'd stoked up before they left just minutes ago was completely burned down to the embers. So they basically lost track of so much time. They had no idea how they got off of the lake, how they got back to their campsite. The fire that was just burning really tall a couple minutes ago is totally out now, so obviously a few hours had gone by. Now, this story even includes the aftermath, so what happened to them psychologically when they came home from this camping trip. So one of the guys that got abducted, his name was Jack. Jack was the first to start having nightmares. In these dreams, he saw beings with long necks and large heads. He saw the beings examining his arm, while Jim, Chuck, and Charlie sat on a nearby bench, not able to intervene. So I guess those are all of the names of the guys that were with him, and he was having dreams that the aliens were like poking him and like examining him, and his friends were just watching, doing nothing. Imagine if my friends did that, I would not be very happy with them. So the beings had large metallic glowing eyes with no lids, and their hands were insect-like with 4 fingers. And after Jack was having dreams and sort of told his friends about them, his friends also admitted that they were having dreams, and in their dreams they would have flashbacks of being on the lakes and seeing these weird creatures, so that's just terrifying. The fact that all of these friends experienced the same thing makes it so real and makes it just proven that it had to have happened, right? So this is why I don't go camping, okay? So the next case is called the Betty and Barney Hill alien abduction. In 1961, a married couple were driving home from vacation at Niagara Falls when they saw what they thought was a falling star, but it moved around in the sky and began to grow bigger. Okay, first of all, Niagara Falls is like an hour from where I live, so that's great. Just to know we have aliens that kind of hang out around Niagara Falls. That's wonderful to know. They decided to drive slowly along the road and follow the light as it grew closer to them in the sky, eventually stopping in the middle of the highway as the object hovered only 80 to 100 feet from them. Oh my gosh, imagine driving home at night and seeing what you think is a falling star, and suddenly it's like right in front of your car on the road. No. So at this point, Barney Hill gets out of his car and starts walking towards the light, which is like a horror movie no-no. I don't know why people think it's okay to just inspect things like that. Like, I would stay in my car, I would call the police, I would drive the other way, I would not approach this big light star thing. So he goes to get a closer look and he sees a craft with 8 to 11 humanoid creatures in black uniforms. He screamed, "They're going to capture us," and ran back to the car, and the couple drove home. So this is what's really creepy. They think that they got away from these humanoid alien creatures, but a drive that should have taken them 3 hours mysteriously took them 7. So once again, they lost a lot of time. So there were a lot of strange things that happened to them that concluded that they could have been alien abducted. So we're going to talk about the aftermath for them as well. Arriving home at about dawn, the Hills assert that they had some odd sensations and impulses that they could not readily explain. Betty insisted that their luggage had to be kept at the back of the house instead of the front door when they got home, which was very odd behavior for her, because why would she care where her luggage was in the house? Their watches would never run again. Like, both of their watches stopped, and they looked at other watches in the house and they were all stopped as well, which is so creepy. Barney noticed that the leather strap on his binoculars were torn and he couldn't remember how that happened. The toes of his best dress shoes were torn as well. So they decided to both take long showers to remove possible contamination, and they each drew a picture of what they had observed, and their drawings were strikingly similar. So once again, it's more than one person experiencing something, so it just makes it more clear that it could have actually happened. Because imagine like like being abducted with your like partner, your girlfriend or boyfriend, and you both draw the same alien that you saw, like, ugh. So they decided to go to bed for a few hours, which I don't know how you would sleep after that. But Betty got up after a few hours and she started to put away the dress and the shoes that she wore while she was in the car. And as she was hanging them up in her closet, she noticed that a lot of the parts of the clothing were torn and there was this weird pinkish powder all over them. So when she hung them up, this powder like fell off of her dress. And it says that over the years, 5 laboratories have conducted chemical and forensic analysis on the dress. It doesn't say if they found anything weird with it. I think they just don't know what this powder is. Like, they've never discovered what it is. So it's some alien powder that we have never known about. There were also shiny circles on the car's trunk that had not been there the previous day. Betty and Barney also experimented with a compass, noting that when they moved it close to the spots on the car, the needle would whirl rapidly. That is so scary. Like this, I'm just getting chills right now because I would never want to experience something like this.